Coaching in Session,
your exclusive destination for unparalleled personal and professional growth.
With your host, Michael Rearden.
Whether you choose to live within limits or break free, your mindset journey begins here.
Welcome, Brendan Coates, to Coaching in Session. Today, we're going to be talking about your work and some of the things that you have done in your past and will be doing in the future, because I think it's so important to get to know the person, not only about what they have done, but what they plan to do in their life. And we are on this journey together. And I think everyone has a purpose or a meaning that they're trying to exhibit or to share with other people in the world. And you are no different than that. You are trying to create a wave that is going to help people with their health and their mindset. And it's so important that we get this out to them. So if you could, can you tell the world who you are, what you do, and of course, how you help?
Sure. Of course. Thanks so much for having me again. They call me the Gut Whisperer. That wasn't a title that I gave myself. It was given to me by Bedros Keuilian. He's the author of Man Up. He's a pretty well-known figure in the United States and globally for his coaching. My field of expertise it originated with gut health and functional medicine. I've been practicing for almost 15 years, and my wheelhouse is leaky gut, and I help individuals all around the world with their digestive issues, immune compromise, and health challenges, typically people with weight issues, and then it's gone into personal development and human behavior with a lot of psychology. I've been a student of Dr. John Demartini's for 18 years now, going on 19. And now that I've learned about the autonomic nervous system much more deeper on a psychological field, if you will, now I apply psychology into physiology. And now it's just a beautiful, complete package, if you will, helping people with mindset and their body's physiology. So,
yeah, I know when I first started off teaching, just like teaching in the schools, in the public schools, and I compare myself to where I was when I first started. And of course I can say, oh man, I was a terrible teacher comparing myself to who I was then. But that is progression, right? You know, we grow and we learn, and we are going to learn different things that will be of benefit to people. I think that's so important that you not only find someone who is an expert in the field, but you find someone who's a lifelong student. And it's so important that you find people who are not only keeping up with the times, but are interested into not have the mindset of, well, it's always been done this way. This is, how things have always been done. And I think of a story. It was of a pork roast story. It was a daughter that asked the mom, "Hey, mom, why do we cut the end off our, our pork roast?" And the mom says, "I don't know." And so it's like, let's go ask grandma. So they ask grandma together. Grandma says, "Oh, well, I don't know." And so they asked the great grandmother, and the great grandmother said, "Oh, the reason I cut the end off the pork roast is because it didn't fit in the oven. The ovens back then, when she was cooking pork roast, were a lot smaller. So we have these big ovens today. And so there was no need for them to keep on cutting off that end of the pork roast, but yet they were doing it because it was their heritage, or maybe there was their, learning or their teaching." And so that daughter now would probably not be cutting the end off the pork roast and wasting it or cooking it separate. She can do it all as a whole. And this is to say that times change. And so people will change too. And we can look at how people are changing so drastically with diets, with exposure to environments, because when, kids, for example, they used to be outside all the time. Now they're inside all the time. And there's a lot of fears for the sun and the sunblock and everything. So we can go down what is happening in the mind, what is happening in the world. But let's take a step back first. Let's take a step back at where humans are going today. Do you see, in your experience in the beginning of your work and then your work today, an increase in issues with the gut, with people dealing with issues with their health?
It's more prevalent now than ever. People are sicker now than ever. But there's also a correlation with the environment being highly toxic. We are in the most polluted era of mankind in our existence. And so there's no surprise there, and there's no coincidence. With regards to the gut, in my personal clinical practice, I'm seeing the most I've ever seen with individuals who have H. pylori and SIBO. And so these are conditions of the gut, conditions of low levels of stomach acid, allowing pathogens to essentially invade into the body, into the stomach, causing a medley of symptoms. We're seeing a lot of probiotic resistance and antibiotic resistance. So the ecosystem within the gut being influenced by bacteria, both pathogenic and opportunistic, and even beneficial, it's being significantly changed. And we can match this to part of our evolution, right? It's just how humanity is moving. But at the same time, there's definitely some new changes happening. And again, we are definitely at a cusp of, there is a huge movement with individuals moving towards a healthier, desirable outcome. But at the same time, there's a huge percentage of the population that are in a downwards trajectory, spiraling worse and worse and worse into degeneration. It's conversations like this, hopefully, that can reach even just one new person, can provoke some new thinking. And as you're talking about the pork ends, if we can shape and adjust our paradigms and help other people adjust theirs, then we're still making some progress. But it's a challenge for sure. People are stuck and people are unhealthy. The food is unhealthy. The environment's unhealthy. And it's really, really tough to move forward. So it's just about having new conversations and just stimulating new ideas. And like I said, just giving people permission and giving people an opportunity to ask new questions and look at things differently.
Yeah, very true. I think of, we have so many fast food spots on every corner. We have so much boxed and processed foods in our grocery stores. And it is easy to get those foods because, we don't want to have to go to the grocery store every day because we might not have the time. You might have kids or something along those lines, and you're running around 1, 2, 3 jobs maybe, and it is difficult to juggle everything. So, it's easy to, get some pasta and just throw it in some water and then get some jarred sauce. And, we can go down that road. I was reading something and they said you shouldn't buy anything with more than 5 ingredients in it. And you especially shouldn't be eating anything of an ingredient you can't pronounce. So they were basically saying there's so many, chemicals in the foods that we are consuming in our day. And not many people even know how they're doing it because they're not knowing how to read the nutrition labels. They don't know what types of intakes they should be having, proteins, carbs, fats. It's almost like they just kind of do what they like and it develops into their lifestyle. And what they tend to do with that lifestyle is they try to be healthy here and there. They say, well, I had a salad or I ate a multivitamin. And so, or I had a probiotic pill, right? So, they're going down these, lines of, well, I did something healthy. Can it counteract the bad? And what is your experience on that? Can people counteract the bad, or do we need to look at the root and say, hey, we need to make some changes?
Yeah, that's a good point. Funny point, too. You can't outwork a bad diet. We can temporarily in our youthful years, but at the same time, what we do throughout a lifetime is going to compound with interest. Sometimes I have conversations with individuals and I say that we kind of have 3 phases in our life, if you will. And it's really, really basic understanding or analogy. But the first phase is kind of the punishment phase, right? And that's from when we're kids to when we are in essentially our maybe late 20s, where we can, have the late night partying and early mornings and sleepless nights and consuming of all the consumables that really aren't favorable. But hey, we're youthful. We've got all of this energy and we're still growing. So the body can really, really combat the damage and the assault that we're doing. And then there is sort of the maintenance phase. The maintenance phase is, let's just say, late 20s to maybe early 40s. Now, this phase I'm seeing decreasing more and more and more. But maintenance phase essentially is the body sort of dealing the cards that what you've been dealt with in terms of what did you do for the punishment phase. And the body's dealing with what you did, and it's somewhat maintaining it. Signs and symptoms are just starting to creep up in terms of maybe some degeneration or some body aches, and maybe the immune system's getting a little bit, weakened, or maybe hormones are changing and you're maybe gaining weight a little bit more. You're seeing some fat develop a little bit around the abdomen. But that's the maintenance phase. And then ultimately the consequence phase, or the final phase, is when you're in your mid 40s and all the way upwards, 60s, 70s, 80s. And ultimately that's when sickness really starts to present itself, right? Starting to get autoimmune conditions, starting to really develop some conditions that are really holding you back. And so what happens is The body wants to heal. The body wants to be in an optimum state of performance, but it requires fuel. It requires fundamental micronutrients and macronutrients to enable the body to work at an optimum level. But what I'm seeing is the punishment phase being compounded with the environment, children being born behind the eight ball just in terms of being in a toxic environment. So mothers and fathers are more toxic than ever. And so they're creating and producing offspring that are already toxic. There's one study, I can't remember which one it was, but they were identifying over 200 metals and plastics in the umbilical cords of babies right from after pregnancy, right after birth. And so the babies are already being born behind the eight ball in terms of having a toxic exposure and a toxic load within the body. And then you compound that with being taken off breastfeeding or consuming formula prematurely and then being exposed to gluten, right? Like I remember I was a kid, little baby, I'm sure I had arrowroot crackers, pretty much every baby does, right? But that's premature exposure to gluten and processed wheat and other foods. And then all of a sudden we are vaccinating our children, babies, at such a young rate and a medley of vaccines that you and I, we weren't exposed to when we were first born, right? They've added the list of vaccines. And so all of these, again, with antibiotics, they all add up. And it can be the straw that's breaking the camel's back, if you will, and it looks differently for everyone. So it's tough. We are really, really challenged right now more than ever. But the positive note is, and it's kind of a long diversion, but in that maintenance phase, when people start to wake up, or if they do, they can change their health. They can completely change the trajectory of their future. They can change the trajectory of their genetics through epigenetics, right? Through the environment. Just because, let's say, your grandfather died of a heart attack and your dad died of a heart attack and his brother or your uncle died of a heart attack, does not mean you're destined to get a heart attack. It just means that you might be predisposed, but it's also a beautiful feedback to let you know that, hey, what your ancestors did, it wasn't working. So it's an opportunity to change what you're doing. And going back to your point just about the fast food on the corners, the food deserts, if you will. Yeah, the system's designed that way for a reason, unfortunately. Does it cost more expensive? Is it more expensive to eat healthy and organic foods? Yes and no, right? If you're eating nutrient-dense foods, good quality foods, the appetite and the desire to eat more tends to come down because you're not eating the highly processed and the overly enhanced flavor foods that you find in boxes and multiple ingredients foods. So that diminishes the appetite. And then as well, you're getting nutrient-dense calories. Whereas just as you mentioned earlier with the fast food, those are empty calories and not nutrient-dense calories. So if you start to simplify your diet with holistic foods, it might perceive or might come across as being more expensive, but in the long run, it's way, way, way cheaper. So again, it's just simplifying our diets and trying to avoid those fast foods. And it also comes down to a little bit of living a life on purpose. I think that there's so many people that are in the rat race and they've been conditioned to trade their time for money. They've been conditioned to just get a job and pursue something that may not necessarily be so inspiring. And so they might be in a position where they require external motivation and they're not inspired to work. And so that drains their energy. They don't have much time. So they catch themselves in the drive-thrus or pursuing those instantly gratifying foods. Whereas individuals that are really living a life on purpose and pursuing something that's truly inspiring and they've got a lifelong mission, those are the types of individuals that are less susceptible to those instantly gratifying foods and fast foods and those foods of that nature.
Yeah, very true. I loved everything you said. Let me start to break some of that down, going to our children and all the things that they're getting that we didn't get. I think of, depending on where you live, it's good to be promoted a little bit more. Like here in the United States, we have a schedule of vaccines that you would give your kids. And there's a movement, if we had to say something of, parents saying, I'm not doing this. But then there's schools that won't allow their, student body to not be vaccinated. So some parents just feel compelled of, well, I can't afford daycare, or I can't afford to stay home. So they just kind of allow their kids to kind of, get these vaccines so they can go to school. Parent choice, right? But it leads to them, having issues later down the road because, as you said, more resilient when you're younger. But then as you're getting older, things start to break down. I remember when I was 28, I turned 28, and I was eating a bunch of like rice because it's Puerto Rican. I was eating a bunch of rice and beans and everything, and I didn't gain a lick of weight. And then like 28, all of a sudden, like where did all this weight come from? Gained like 15 pounds in like, like a month. And I was like, something has to change. And so I started to look at my diet. What I did was I bought a scale and I said, okay, I'm just going to do all my macros. Like I know how to do it. And I was just doing everything. I had to be more driven, right? I had to give myself the purpose, right? I couldn't be lazy with my eating anymore. I couldn't just say, hey, let me go get a bacon, egg, and cheese. Let me go do something quick. It was like, let me focus on what I need, right? And when I did that, I started to get more energy because at the time when I was gaining the weight, I started to become more lethargic. And I was like, wait, what's happening? I'm like, I'm getting older. I'm like, is this what people say, a midlife crisis? Or, like when you get older, you have all these problems. And I'm like, no, it's not going to happen to me. So I started to give myself, this mindset of my health is critical. It is the utmost importance because I have a family and I want to be able to run with my kids and do all the things that my kids want me to do with them. I want to be able to throw them up in the air as many times as they want and not have to worry about my back or my arms or something aching, right? So I gave myself that idea. However, when we look at the world today, most people, they're lazy in the aspect of the longevity of themselves because they have the mindset of it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so people, they will work all of these hours to make all this money. But then down the road, when they're 40 plus, they'll spend all that money that they earned to get back to better health. And so people are living backwards. They can just live a better life and then they're going to live with purpose as they move on. And so, yeah, money can always be made, but we are living in a world where, the materialistic goods or the lifestyles that we can be living are so enticing. And the foods that we could be eating that are filled with, all of these enhanced flavorings is so enticing, right? Like you eat a Dorito, you're like, whoa, it's a burst of flavor, but it's also a burst of chemicals. And, people don't necessarily put one and two together. The sodas that they drink with all of these sugars. And, I don't drink soda or anything. I drink, regular water or mineral water, right? That's what I like. And you have to get used to it. If you want something different, put a little lemon in it or something. That's your spice in life, right? You don't need to say, oh, I need to have Diet Dr. Pepper because, this regular Dr. Pepper is too much sugar. It's like, people are being fooled by the advertisement, right? Diet must be better. This salad must be good from McDonald's. And like, they don't understand, like baby carrots, for example, they're washed with chlorine so they can stay the orange color. Right. So if you ever see the baby carrots white, it's because of the chlorine and people don't even know what they're eating. And so when we start to look at, all of the issues with our world today, where would someone start to look at to say, hey, I'm trying to live on purpose. I'm trying not to be lazy with myself anymore. Where do I begin?
I think it would be a little bit of a different approach, or just we can acknowledge that we're not necessarily lazy. We're strategic. Humans are very, very smart in terms of trying to get the best results with the least amount of effort as possible. So that's conditioning. And we're designed that way. Hard work is hard work, right? I would wonder with you, do you enjoy waking up, let's say, every morning at 5 a.m.? Or let's say if you like to do the cold plunges, there's no enjoyment of doing a cold plunge, but we get the enjoyment afterwards and the results that come afterwards. Humans are so conditioned to pursue pleasure and avoid pain at all costs, really. I think when it comes to values, and I'm going to quote Dr. John DeMartini, is when someone is really in alignment with their highest values, they will equally pursue something that's challenging and supporting to them because they see that it aligns with their values. But at the same time, when someone is not in alignment with their values, they're really trying to avoid pain and just pursuing of the pleasure as much as possible. So if someone is not necessarily alignment with their life or their telos, as Aristotle puts it, the teleology, the end in mind, then they're going to be a lot likely and susceptible to reaching for foods that are also instantly gratifying and pleasurable foods. Whereas you just said, for example, and I'm sure some of your listeners and viewers, I know I can relate to this with some of my clients that I've worked with, is, someone's like, I don't like water, for example. I like drinking Pepsi or Diet Dr. Pepper, for example. Well, I don't like the taste of broccoli, right? I don't like eating healthy. It just doesn't taste good. Well, then we need to look at the rest of their life. What are they doing with their life? What are the choices that they're doing? Who are the people that they're hanging out with? Are they being influenced in a way that does not complement their highest values? Some people don't even know what their highest values are or what their life's mission and their life's purpose is. And so if you don't know what your life's mission and your life's purpose is, you're not going to make choices around food that are going to complement your life's work. I use this as an example. Let's say, and this is an exercise for your viewership and your listenership. Let's say you've been asked to speak on stage in front of maybe 100 or 1,000 people. Now, most people are scared of public speaking, but let's say that's not the case. And you get to choose the topic of your wheelhouse. So, Michael, for example, what would yours be? If you get a keynote talk.
Mindset. It'll be mindset.
Okay, so you've been asked to speak about mindset, and the presentation is in 5 days. Now, the choices that you're going to choose for foods for the next 5 days, I'm going to guess and assume that you're going to be really strategic with the foods that you're eating. Why would that be?
For the utmost energy and focus.
Yeah, so that you can also deliver a kick-ass presentation on mindset, so you're not stumbling with words. Maybe you've even memorized the entire presentation. And so you are just on track for that presentation because that is super, super high on your values. Now, most people aren't living as though they're performing. Most people are working in a job or have a career or doing something that's not necessarily inspiring. And so they're eating foods that reflect that. But if you are living a life that's truly on purpose and you've got a long life mission, you're now essentially performing every single day. And so now you choose the foods that are in alignment with performance because you're performing. So I love using that as a reframing around foods because most people, they're not living a life performing to their highest values. They're not aligned. And so when you're not aligned, you're more susceptible to the foods that aren't necessarily going to complement your memory or your energy or your focus or your mood or your physique, your performance that way. But if you're on purpose, you're really doing your hardest, at least with the education that you have, at least picking foods that are going to help you perform.
I love that example. I think of when I was younger, I didn't like asparagus. It was terrible. I was like, what's this? This is nasty. My mom loved it. Yeah. And eventually, today I can eat asparagus all day long. So it's like, the taste buds change, as you develop. It's like a wine, it matures. And so we mature too. But sometimes we continue with the mindset of we don't like something because we tried it once and it didn't work. So we didn't like broccoli. We don't like salads. If we do like salads, we like the ones from Olive Garden with a bunch of dressing and a bunch of Parmesan cheese, right? So we get all the, all the good stuff, right? The breadsticks, endless. And, we are going down this path of not changing with the times. And it's very, reminiscent of what I said in the beginning of our conversation is we would love nothing more to kind of just coast through life, right? The brain, the body, it loves to conserve energy, right? If we don't have to get up and everything was given to us, I'm sure most people, they would do that. They would say, oh, wait, I don't have to get up. I don't do anything. We could look at at the pandemic when people were getting money, checks, working from home. They were like, this is pretty nice. I don't have to go out. Amazon's, is now 3-day delivery instead of 2 because everyone's ordering from Amazon. We can go, we can talk about that, but it creates this mentality of we don't have to try too hard, right? And in our world today, we don't have to try. If you think about it, we don't have to try that hard. If we want something, we pick up our phone and we can get it, right? It's not hard. However, we can look back at our ancestors and how they had to go hunt and gather, and they had to get the foods that they needed. They had to build the shelters that they had to, that they needed to live in to stay warm and dry. And we don't necessarily have to worry about that. Our safety, our security, water, running water, all of this is given to us. So there's a lot of, moments where we could be working and burning calories where we're not. And now we have more calorie dense foods more than ever. And so we're packing on the weight. And so most people, when they are gaining the weight, they look at themselves in the mirror, they go, oh, this is getting bad. And then they kind of, put the scale in the closet and they stop looking in the mirror. More of it is as a passing glance. Do I have anything in my teeth? Is my hair okay? Do I have bags under my eyes? And, they look at just the surface level things. And one of the things I love with like working with someone like yourself, Brendan, is like you have no choice but to get to the roots, right? You have to say, okay, well, let's look at where things went wrong, right? Or where things are going wrong or how we can make things better, right? However you want to phrase it. But that is what people need. Some people need a kick in the butt, right? If people come for coaching with me, they already know what they're going to get. They're not getting no sugar-coated, Mike saying, oh, I'm going to hold your hand every single time. Hey, we got some work to do, right? People don't call me when everything is good. They call me when their world is falling apart. And people, in too many people, they wait until they get the doctor's note, until they get the bad news and have a stroke. There's something that happens that makes them wake up. And one of the things I love with the podcast is, every episode is an opportunity for a guest or for myself to help spark that initiative in a person to say, hey, we can wake up today. Like, what's happening? Like, why you're not waking up? What is stopping you? And we know that, again, the mind is going to be difficult to beat, especially if you have been letting it win every single day. And so when we look at a person who is waiting for something bad to happen before they call and they reach out to you, or they inquire about a workshop to how to fix everything that's going on or went wrong, what is it that you can say to them to say, hey, why wait? Take action today.
2 points. First, I want to go back to what you were mentioning about our ancestors. My mom said this, and when I heard her say it, it just really gave me some perspective. She said, we, you included, we are our great-great-grandparents' wildest dreams. And I was like, wow, we really are. What we're doing right now, they could only just have pipe dreams of what was possible. And it's really interesting, come to think about it. It wasn't that long ago where we were still hunters and gatherers. So it's crazy what humanity has achieved. Your second point with regards to where to start or what's holding someone back. I think there's a large element of disappointment with regards to how ultimately humanity has been conditioned from the elites and from dogmatic schooling systems and big corporations, big agriculture. It really is designed for just the top percentage to really excel, and the rest of the population, it's tough. It's a challenge, right? Life is not as easy as it could be. So when individuals do want to make a concerted effort, or they have had that tipping point, right? They've been to the doctor and they've had the diagnosis, or they've been told that they need to take cholesterol medication because you got high cholesterol, or there was a health scare, whatever the case may be. Most cases, these individuals have sought out help. They've gone to the specialists, or they've gone to the doctors and the GPs and the family doctors, or maybe they've hired an online coach. Unfortunately, there's more disappointment than success. Most people, when they do pursue guidance, a lot of the times the guidance is, in my humble opinion, it's not sound. There's a lot of people that are touting themselves as amazing teachers or healers and all that, but they're kind of dangling carrots, if you will, with emotions, and they're selling their courses or their intellectual property on emotions, but they're not selling on logic. And so again, humans, we've been tricked and duped, and we've been conditioned to make our decisions based on emotion, not on logic. And so when individuals have made their efforts, they were maybe led down a different path and they didn't get the results that they're looking for. They maybe tried again and they've been burnt, and then they've been burnt, and they've been burnt. And humanity in and of itself, if we look at epigenetic tags, we've been burnt by so many efforts. And so sometimes it's just so much easier to accept normalcy instead of taking a big leap of faith and trying to go against the grain and trying to break out of compliance or, like I said, normalcy or average. So it's being able to, again, have conversations like this, explore, read, find people and teachers that you resonate with, try to find the truth, because the truth is definitely out there. And then give yourself permission to make a logical, objective decision rather than an emotional decision. If someone is tempting you with sort of prize or consequence, then I think that they're toying on your emotional strings. Now, unfortunately, that's how sales work, right? Let's face it. People make a purchase based on emotion, not really logic. And sometimes it's required. Sometimes we need to show the unintended consequences of continuing down that path in order for someone to make a decision. But ultimately, it's being wise with your money and finding a teacher that really knows their stuff, not just a beautiful Instagram influencer that's flashing cars and things like that. Because typically, smoke and mirrors, right? Smoke and mirrors.
Very true. I think of a couple things. I think of going back to what you said, how like people kind of give up. I think of like the experiment they did with the dogs, and one dog had flooring that had electric cables that would shock the dog periodically. And then the other room with the other dog didn't have that, right? And they gave the dogs to both the same stimulus, right? They would give them the same food, they would give them the same playtime. But eventually the dog that was getting shocked constantly said, I don't want to eat anymore. I don't want to play anymore. And that's what happens with people who have been beaten and have been defeated again and again, where they just kind of, like slunk down and say, what's the point? And the point is we still have life. We still have meaning. Whether you like it or not, your mind is or your brain is equipped to keep you alive. It's one of the reasons why it tries to conserve energy in the case of fight or flight. It wants to say, hey, if something goes on, I want to be able to protect myself. That is its mechanism. And I don't think people realize that if you are out of shape, you can't fight or you can't run. Okay. Like, I don't know if you are 300 pounds overweight and you try to run away from a dog that's chasing you, you're not going to make it. All right. So you can either wait for the dog to bite you and say, whoa, maybe I should, work on my running or to, work on stretching or whatever you need to do, your fitness, your health, whatever. Or you can, just accept life for all the bad that it gives you. And there's just so many opportunities for someone to get up again. And I believe that, you need one person to believe in you in order for you to take action, right? It could be yourself, and that's ideal. But then sometimes you need someone else, right? It could be a partner, but it's not their responsibility. It could be a child that's proud of you and they see you accomplishing things, and that could be your motivator. I can't tell you how many parents I speak with, and I go, what's your purpose? And the first thing they say is their child. That's biology, right? Because you are there to protect them. They can't protect themselves. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to clean. They don't know how to, do the things that adults know how to do. Of course, one day they will, and they kind of leave the nest, and it's almost like, now where's your purpose, right? Maybe they have grandkids. That could be your new purpose, but you do have to give yourself more meaning than just someone else. So you have to do the internal work. What do you want? What do you want to accomplish? And I believe everyone is here for a reason. Everyone has a deeper meaning than just existing. So we do have to get more energy in our days, or in our body, in our life. And we do have to be more consistent with the purpose, as we were talking about. I like to use the word lazy, but I love the word you use, strategic conditioning. Is powerful. I just like to tell people, like, hey, you're either doing it or you're not doing it, right? I like to say this. It's like a saying I have. There's two types of people in this world: people who want it and people who kind of want it. Most people, they kind of want it. If you think about it, like most people, they want the house, they want the cars, they want better health, they want the body, right? But they don't want to do the work, right? So, again, we can encourage people to do the work all the time. We can tell people, hey, we can follow this diet or this program. Think of all the fad diets, keto, whole, whole 30 or whatever it is, 90-minute abs or 90-second abs or 60-second abs, whatever they have today. And you just have to get real. You don't need all these programs. You just need yourself to give yourself the mindset of, if I want to change, I need to be consistent every single day. And you can find people. I know, Brendan, you and I spoke for a little bit. I looked up you websites and stuff like that. You are a person who's been consistent. And I believe when you get a coach, it should be a person who has walked the walk and talked the talk. It shouldn't be someone who's 300 pounds overweight saying, hey, guys, if you need some diet help, come see me, right? Like you need someone who, who's that person, right? Who's fit, who's strong. Family values, for example, we had a group episode, episode 600 of the podcast. That right there was talking about people who were good with families. And so I'm not going to bring someone who is not good with families or who can't look at the bad in their families and say, hey, let's look at what we can do next. So we get people who are working, who are capable, who understand that, hey, we understand that, people are going to have different levels in their life. One day you might be really low, and maybe one day you're really high. And maybe really low, we might do the bare minimum. Maybe we get up, we brush our teeth, we fight in the day, right? But if we can give ourselves that good diet for more energy, as you were saying, we're getting ready for our presentation in 5 days. We need to give ourselves that mindset of, if we're not here today, where can I be in 3 days or 5 days or 10 days or whatever it be, so I can get the energy to do what I want. We just can't say, well, today is another day and you do the same things and every day is level 1. Let's go up. Let's start to crescendo and start to rise into the people that we're supposed to be. It's not going to be instant. I know people, they love instant, but we have to do the work and we have to be deliberate. So as we begin to wrap up, of course, Brendan, I would love to get some final thoughts, some final words, talk about anything you want. And then also please tell people where they can find you, learn more about the work you're doing, any upcoming events, books, whatever you want to plug. This is your time.
Yeah, it's going to double down on that topic just about the laziness. Is no one moves a muscle without the consideration of more upside than downside, right? And so when it comes to values, every single person lives in accordance to their highest values and their life demonstrates it. But when someone does not necessarily pursue good nutrition, right, or pursue exercise, but they say that I want to get fit, but their life doesn't demonstrate it. Their life demonstrates their highest values. And so we need to look at their life and how it's being demonstrated, but at the same time, their motives and their unconscious motives. And every single person has unconscious motives, and the operative word being unconscious, they're not necessarily aware of them. But there's a motive, there's a strategy, right? And so sometimes people, if we call them, let's say, lazy, well, there's an actual unconscious strategy for their behaviors and for their actions. And so maybe, let's just say, for example, someone wants to quit smoking, but they still smoke. And they say, oh man, I hate smoking. I've got to quit smoking. Like, it's killing me. Well, why are you doing it? There's an unconscious motive. There's clearly a benefit, because if there wasn't a benefit, you wouldn't be doing it, right? But we need to look at what is the value and also what's the void. And so the void might be, well, maybe when they're smoking the cigarette, they get a sense of escapism. Maybe it calms them down. It allows for maybe social belonging with other friends. Maybe it creates stimulating conversations. Maybe it makes them feel part of a group. All of these things, if they value that, then now there's some unconscious motives and some benefits to having those cigarettes. And so realistically, do they actually want to quit smoking because there's those benefits to them and that's why they're doing it? And so ultimately, with regards to how everyone's life demonstrates their values and your behavior demonstrates your values, sometimes when it comes to quitting smoking, or let's say quitting alcohol, or getting to the gym, we need to find a viable alternative from, what is that smoke giving you? Okay, it's the social aspect, the conversations, escapism, making you feel belong. Okay, how can we achieve all of those things with a different option, a viable alternative? And then when someone sees that there are some viable alternatives, then at least that empowers them to make a choice. But in the cases of cigarette smoke or addiction or porn or not exercising, there are unconscious motives to that behavior and they don't see any viable alternatives. So that's why they continue to perform that repetitive task or the repetitive behavior, if you will. So it's giving people permission and just looking at things differently to see viable alternatives, because there's lots and lots of choices out there. So it's a reframing of the laziness. It's actually a beautiful strategy, but people, they tend to beat themselves up and judge themselves for it and to compare themselves to other people's lives. But realistically, everyone's living in their own values. So it's not fair to really judge ourselves for that. With regards to my social channels and where your viewership and listenership can find me, I'm on YouTube, The Gut Whisperer. My Instagram handle is The Gut Whisperer. I think that we're going to be airing this podcast shortly after I'm the founder of Canada's largest wellness expo. It's called Longevity Summit Canada. So you can certainly find the Instagram page there and the website. Lots and lots of incredible speakers, and we've got a lot of vendors and partnerships with that. And that's about it. I've been very blessed to align myself with some incredible teachers. I was most recently traveling around the world for the last 3 months with Dr. John DeMartini at his breakthrough experience. Maybe some of your viewership and listenership know about him. And it's just being able to, as I say, and as Dr. John says, standing on the shoulders of giants and learning from people that have paved the way before me. Because let's face it, nothing's really, the wheel has already been invented, right? No one's reinventing the wheel. But if we can leverage the leaders before us and learn what they've done, then it's a beautiful thing. We can complement their teachings and create our own. And that's ultimately what I've been doing, just as you as well. So thank you.
Beautifully said. Reframing your mind, right, and developing your values is a great place to begin. Like as you were saying, just kind of in a nutshell. And I know when people are listening to this episode, they're going to, number one, start to look at themselves and feel bad for maybe who they are today, right? And I don't want you to feel bad about what you have been doing, right? Because today is an opportunity for you to change, right? Today can be the beginning. Today can be day one, right? There's a saying, one day or day one. And most people, they live with the idea of one day I'll do it. But if you give yourself of today is day one, that's where everything begins to change. So as you said, we learn from so many great mentors and so many great guides who have already walked the walk and who have already paved the way. And it's important that we learn from those lessons. And it's important that we understand that, times are going to also be changing. So we always kind of get the new kid on the block sometimes too, Brendan. All right. So we look at, where the world was and we look at where the world is today. And, the work that you're doing is definitely touching base on all of those categories. So how you're helping people with your workshops and expos and books and podcast episodes is going to be, the inception of something great happening in someone's life. And as you said, early on, even if it's just one person, you made a difference today. So, you can be that one person if you're listening to this right now. You can be that change, right? This can be your day one. So I do want to thank you, Brendan, for coming on, spending some time, of course, and talking about your work today.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. And again, for your viewership and your listenership, just give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to be authentically, undeniably on purpose. And when you do, everything changes, right? So, and I'll say another one of my quotes that I learned, and this is appropriate for you too. If we keep doing what we're doing, eventually all of our mentors and the teachers and the leaders, they're going to die off anyways. So then we've got to take their spot anyways. So if we keep at it, then we'll take their place. So it's just a matter of time.
Brendan Coates, everyone.